Hello.
Hello,
What's your name?
my name is Dr. Balbir Gurm.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Mangdam, Punjab in 1960 in a little village, and then I was Balbir Sandhu.
And how and when did you arrive on the decision to move to Canada?
Okay, so I didn't really decide. Our family, my great uncle, Sham Singh, and great Buaji Basant Kaur, they were here in 1906. Actually, our great uncle, he was here in 1906, but Buaji came later, and actually my other Baba, her brother, came with her to Canada at that time, but he decided to go back, so he never stayed. And then my Tayaji was very adventurous, so in 1938, he came here on a student visa to UBC, and then he stayed with Buaji and Poparji. And after that, he sponsored my other Thaya, and then he sponsored my dad in 1960. And so Dad came in 61 by himself when I was 1, and Mom and I stayed in Punjab in Sandhama. And then after he got settled here, after working all across BC trying to get employed, he finally started working at Rainier, which was called Rainier Sawmill at the time in Vancouver. And then he bought a house, and then he sponsored Mom and I to come. So we came when I was 6 years old.
Interesting. So, I want to ask you, when you first came to Canada,
Yes.
I think probably must be your first experience in the plane as well.
Yes.
Right? So when you landed at the Vancouver airport, what were the feelings that you were experiencing at that time? Do you have any recollections? Like, how did you feel, your first time in Canada?
Yeah. I just have very vague memories. I remember it wasn't the airport that it looks like now. People could actually go outside and watch the planes land. And I remember seeing the entire family up there. And I wasn't, of course, recognizing my dad because I hadn't really seen him since I was 1 year old. And I was kind of excited at the same time, but at the same time, I did not want to leave my grandparents, my Manji Baba, my Nanni, and my Mamme, because they were really my family that I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit of excitement, a little bit of fear.
Okay. Interesting. And then what did you do? So your dad was there at the airport to pick you and your mom up?
That's right. Well, the whole extended family was here. I mean, I had my mom's cousins, my tainya, right, and my other cousins, and even some friends. Like everybody was there to pick us up. So then we went back home, and then I don't remember much. I just remember that scene, and after that I started grade 1 because it was around February, March when we came in the school year, so they put me in grade 1 because I was 6 years old, even though actually in India I was already in grade 2. So.
Yeah, in India you start grade 1
Yeah,
early.
I started early,
yeah.
And so then by the end of the school year, they decided I didn't know enough English, so I ended up being in grade 1 again in September. But then by the time I got to grade 4, they decided that I needed to move up. So I didn't actually do grade 4. I skipped grade 4, I went to grade 5.
Nice.
And then I was back with my age group. Yeah.
Interesting. So how was it for you, growing up as a Punjabi, as a Punjabi person in Canada, in Vancouver?
Right. So
Can you share some of your experiences while going to school?
Sure. One of the things, it wasn't just for Punjabis, but I remember as a little girl, we weren't allowed to wear pants in school. We had to wear dresses, and it wasn't until I was in about grade 5 that we were actually allowed to wear pants. And also, you know how I talk about relationship violence now, but back then, even in the school, they used to hit you.
Yeah.
So the principal had the strap, and that disappeared around the time I was in grade 5 as well. So I remember that, and then I remember a lot of the discrimination, like even when I first came into grade 1, it was the other Punjabi kids. Like I remember Pam, Nimi, you know, I still see them once in a while now, but they were originally in my class, and two other boys whose names I can't remember, but they were really the ones that supported me and helped me learn Punjabi, or rather English, because they could talk in Punjabi and explain things to me. Like, we didn't have new Canadian classes then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because I was young, I mean, they probably had them for older kids, but they figured I would just learn. And of course I had, you know, by the time Christmas came around, I could speak it. But I do remember experiences of discrimination, not just in elementary school, but on the streets. More so, I recall high school. We used to get called Pakis, Hindus, go home where you came from. So lots of slurs like that. And it wasn't discrimination just against us, I found. It was against the First Nations people, because one of my best friends was Aboriginal, and she used to get, you know, Indians, like, you don't belong here. And considering this is their land, that was like not a very good thing for people to say. And then I had another friend who was Polish, and they used to tell her, you know, you Polak, go back. You know, so there was lots of discrimination while we were growing up.
So discrimination against pretty much, like you said, people from different countries, not
anybody who wasn't
not just
Western,
based on color.
Yeah, no, it was anybody who wasn't Western European. So if you had a different name, right, like my Polish friend. If you looked different, like myself and my Aboriginal friends, right, or my Chinese friends, they used to get told to go back to China too. So everybody was, I would say, greatly discriminated against in the 60s and 70s that I recall. And then on top of that, we had gender issues as well in our own community, and somewhat till today. The women are more oppressed, right? So the boys always had more privileges growing up. We were not allowed to leave the house, go to movies, do those things, whereas the males could, right? So there was that difference as well. And discrimination exists today. It's just not in our face.
In a different form.
It's a different form, because people don't come up to me and say, you Hindu, go back to India. What they do is make sure I don't move up anywhere. There's a glass ceiling, and it's done in subtle ways. It's not enough where you could go to a Human Rights Commission. Not that we had one for a while, but we're about to get one again, and we used to have one. So you can't even complain because it's done so subtly. Whereas in the old days, if we had human rights commissions, it would have been easy to say, hey, we're being discriminated against, right? Now it's just a huge issue. But then in some ways, we've done very well despite all of that. If you look around, many of the people in my age group have gone on to be professionals. Their children are professionals. They've gone on to big businesses. We're in every kind of business you can think of right now. And if you come to Surrey, we're a high percentage of the population. We have signs in Punjabi as well. So even though we've had challenges, we have overcome them. And I think our community as a whole, the Punjabi community, is very, very resilient. You know, no matter what we're put up against, we rise to the challenge.
Yeah, and that's a very big positive.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Another thing I want to ask you is, you know, about the social setting in those days. You know, when you were, when you were young and growing up.
Yes.
How big was the Punjabi community? What did they used to do for socializing? You know, were Indian festivals celebrated? Tell us something about that.
Okay, so in the early days, we celebrated Guru's birthdays, but they were all done, of course, on the Khalsa Diwan Society, the Gurdwara on West 2nd Avenue, which doesn't exist today, because Khalsa Diwan Society was moved in the 70s to Ross Street, right? Now we just call it Ross Street. But back then, all the celebrations were basically done there. In terms of families, we all tried, I think, hard to integrate. So many of us would still have like a Christmas tree. We would give presents to each other, and the community was small enough. I couldn't tell you numbers because I was so young myself.
Of course.
But what I remember is everybody knew everybody. and they took care of everyone because not everyone had a car. And I remember when Dad bought his car, if he was going to go to Chinatown to get vegetables, because you couldn't get things like grele and stuff, pindian, in the South Vancouver area, you'd have to go to Chinatown downtown. So he would ask everybody, did anybody need anything? And so he would just pick it up for everyone. And same with if you needed atta, right? You went down to, I can't remember what it was called, Famous Foods down on Clark Drive. So then again, whoever went would ask who needed atta around, around the neighborhood, and they would just pick it up for everyone. Or sometimes they would give rides to everyone to go with them. So there was a lot of a close-knit network, and it's because it was a small community. Like right now, our numbers are so high, it's very, very difficult to keep in touch with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some of the things. And Vaisakhi, I think the first time it was celebrated was probably in the 70s. Like the first parade I recall, if I can call it a parade, was when we moved the Gurdwara from West 2nd to Ross Street. And I remember making these plastic flowers with my family and friends, and we made like garbage bagfuls because we put them on everyone's cars. So everybody was in the parade, and it was fun. Like the entire community, everybody came down from across BC to be in it, and they were all in it. Not like now where when we celebrate Vaisakhi today, we kind of have a route and people walk and you don't have floats. But even when we were in university in the late 70s and early 80s, we would have a float from the East Indian Students Association of UBC in the Vaisakhi celebrations. And so that was something that Ross Street used to do, is invite people to have floats within the parade.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's changed quite a bit over time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is that, did you also used to visit India when you moved here, after you moved here?
I did not. The first time I went back to India is after I was married, and my husband's Nannaji, who lived in India, came to visit us, and he wanted me to go back and meet my husband's Masi, who lived there. And so he insisted that I go back. So when he returned, my husband and I went with him. Okay. So that would have been in 87, 88. So that was the first time I went back after coming in 67.
Almost after 20, more than 20 years.
That's right, for a lot more than 20 years. And in fact, my mother only went back once in her entire life. And that was when in the 70s, 73, my grandfather in India, Babaji, had sent a telegram back then, right? You didn't have the technology we have now, and it took days to get here. Yeah. And by the time it got here, he found out, Babaji was sick. Everybody in the family, my sisters, my brother, my mom and dad all went. I was the only one who stayed here with my nanny and my mamme. They had come from India by then. And so the rest of them went because I was in school. That was the only reason I didn't go. And Mom never went back after that. So on that trip, unfortunately, Babaji had passed away. So they didn't get to see him, and they were quite upset about that. But that was the only trip that my mother ever made. Yeah, so my first trip, yes, was then. And then I went back to India several times after. But that's because I've been involved in volunteer work forever. At that point, I was sitting on the board of the Canada-India Education Society, and so we were going to Dahan Kleran, the hospital and nursing school there. Every year I would go help them do assessments and try to implement changes to bring them up to local standards. Yeah. So, yeah, not too many trips to India prior to that.
Nice. And the next question I wanted to ask you is, how were the relations of the Punjabi community with the Aboriginal community in those days, on the whole?
On the whole, they were very good. We used to refer to them as our cousins. You know, we would say, oh yeah, tayo dea, right? And so we had very good relations, and I think a part of it was because we had to stick together and band together. Even if you notice now, if you walk into a room and there's different cultural groups, minorities tend to get attracted to each other.
Very true.
Yeah, and I've noticed that over the years, and I think back on when I was younger, and I think that's possibly the reason why we were attracted to them and had, you know, multicultural friends, but all minorities. Like, yeah, I had some Gore friends too, but, you know, I still find that today.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to share with us regarding your own personal experiences or any stories of your family or anything of that sort?
Sure. I think my older Thaya story, Mir Singh's, is probably quite interesting because he was only 18 years old, 18, maybe 20, when he came. And remember, only my parents, Bua and Pupper, were here, right? So Thayas, Bua and Pupper were here, who had their own families and so forth. And he was always adventurous. Like earlier on when he was in India, he wanted to go to New Zealand. But Babaji said no, and that was Thaya was only 16 then. And so then later on, because Buaji and Pupperji were here, when he asked could he go to Canada, Babaji agreed. And I always think of how intelligent he must have been, because he got admitted to UBC from India.
Yeah, that's a very big thing, even, you know, given the fact that in those days, education was not, the Indian education was not recognized over here in Canada.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and this is 1938.
Yeah,
so he got himself admitted to UBC and he came here on a student visa. But you didn't just fly like my story. So he had to go to Hong Kong first on the ship, right? And then he got sick while he was there. So he spent 3 months in Hong Kong trying to get better. And then he arrived in Canada. And the whole journey was long to start with, right? And then when he got here, he did go to school for a year and then discovered financially he couldn't. And that was the story with a lot of our people. If they went to school, that it was very hard to pay tuition. So at that time, he worked in several sawmills up on the island. And as well, later on in life, actually, he became the president of the Khalsa Diwan Society. He was also vice president, secretary, treasurer, you know, and my family's always been involved in Gurdwara politics. Even my Naniji was on the committee many years later, and my mother, all her life, every Sunday, she would go to the Gurdwara and do seva, and sometimes even more. So I think from that perspective, it's interesting. And I guess the other one is that the Khalsa Diwan Society, yes, we say it was a Gurdwara, but in the early days, it was really our community center. And if you needed help with anything, filling in forms, writing letters, because not everybody was educated back then, you could go there and people would just help you. If you had no food, nowhere to stay, you could always stay at the Gurdwara, you could always eat at the Gurdwara. So it kind of served a very social purpose in the community.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that with my family history of people always doing seva is probably why it was ingrained in me, and I can't think of a time when I haven't volunteered myself. You know, it's been a constant in my life, so I guess you are sort of what your surroundings are.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking out the time and sharing your family story with us. It's a great addition to our project.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so one of the things I recall is our community is extremely hardworking. I remember people work double shifts. They would work as many jobs as they could get. I can't remember anyone saying no. But even those who couldn't find other work, they would get together and one person would drive and everybody would go with them they would go to the local farms and pick blueberries, strawberries, whatever was in season, just to get that extra cash, because we weren't an affluent community back then, right? So I think that's one of the other things that contribute to us and why the communities around us think that we're very hardworking people. We have a history of it, and maybe for necessity, but you know, we do have that reputation.